Have you ever looked up at the night sky and wondered what frequencies are held by those twinkles looking right back at you? Can astrology be a cosmic map of sorts that helps us to understand ourselves, our relationships to every other form of life, and to our place in this universe?
It's like watching the hands of a clock, or time unfolding and moving forward across your lifetime or a company's lifetime. It wouldn't hold this mystical, magical place in people's minds that it's something that's hard to fathom or understand, and that there is quite a practical piece to using astrology.
Welcome to the Frequency Files. Thanks for joining us as we explore the vibrations, forms and creations and mechanisms behind them that inform the nature of existence. Deb, you're an amazing astrologer, and I am thrilled to speak with you about the frequency of all things stars. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here.
What drew you to the discipline of astrology?
Do you know, I think I was always curious. As a teenager, I stumbled across a Linda Goodman book at my grandmother's place. And I know this dates me, you know. But there were a lot of us that came to astrology because Linda Goodman really popularised the concept of star sign astrology and how that can be useful. You know, in her books, she'd actually divide the chapters into, if you're a particular, like a Taurus woman or a Taurus man, a Taurus boss, or you have a Taurus child. You know, she divided this in ways that were really useful, that you could see how this might apply to different situations in your life. And so for me, it became a bit of a passion, wanting to learn more about this. And that notion that people's personalities can be different and, you know, influenced by the planets in their chart and what signs the planets fall in. Yeah.
Interesting. And of course, for many people in pop culture, their main reference point for astrology might be the sun sign. And that's cool, but like there's so much more going on than that. So when did that focus on sun sign only astrology happen? Why? And what else is available to people if they look under the hood?
Yeah, very interesting question. The sun sign astrology it became a focus in the late 1920s, early 30s. And it came to the notice of the newspapers, and they're really what popularised this notion of astrology and how it could give people just a little snippet of information that might be interesting or useful. And this came out of noticing that the royal family, particularly the British royal family, still used astrologers in modern times, not just, you know, medieval times, but actually modern times. And that not only was there a curiosity, but people were interested in filling newspaper space in ways that had people reading about things again tomorrow and again tomorrow and again tomorrow. So it's probably the first signs of things being about lifestyle, writing about lifestyle or lifestyle pieces. But it certainly introduced astrology to the masses in the way that we think about star signs today.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting to understand a little bit more about where that came from. And of course, many people know that high net worth people and royal families used and still use astrologers and other forms of divination.
Yes, absolutely. So I think it was a JP Morgan quote that said, millionaires don't use astrology, billionaires do. And so there is that adage that says it's useful information. And for people who are high wealth individuals, they may not necessarily care where the information comes from. It matters more to them how accurate it is and what kind of results it gets them. So you see all kinds of people embracing this. What's interesting is, as you asked previously, there's a sense of astrology being so much more than just what sign you were born under. And this is where it can be really useful to work with your chart and know your chart, because there are many influences. We work with 10 planets. Some astrologers bring in asteroids and other heavenly bodies, and all of them have a meaning or representation in your chart. They represent something about your personality or the life journey and the lessons that you've perhaps chosen to embrace this lifetime. Many astrologers believe that the astrology chart represents your soul contract. So I know that that's not a mainstream idea, and you don't necessarily have to agree or believe in the principle of reincarnation. But if it were possible that we incarnate across many different lifetimes, and that the soul consistently goes through lifetime after lifetime, then it could be possible that the astrology chart represents the lessons that you've chosen to work with this lifetime. It certainly signifies your strengths and what you've mastered previously. And it also gives you an idea of timing. When are these challenges that will come up for you? When are you being asked to grow? When is it time to really, consolidate in your life? And when is it time that you're in a growth phase? And working with the astrology chart in this way can be incredibly helpful, whether we're looking at the birth of a baby, or whether we're looking at the birth of your business or the birth of your book. Okay, the chart for that moment represents huge insight into the journey that represents.
Yeah, of course, there's so much more than the natal charts, right? Country charts.
Absolutely.
So in terms of the frequencies that different planets hold, who decided what those frequencies were, or where did that collective agreement kind of come from that people arrived at this, Mars is about action, and I'm overly simplifying here, but where did that come from?
Again, there's this notion that the ancients really observed what particular heavenly bodies the events that they seem to coincide with. So certain transits coinciding with certain either natural disasters or times of plenty would actually give them some ideas around what the frequencies or the vibration of some of these planets, some being positive, some they saw as more negative or challenging, and particularly when they fell in certain zodiac signs could be more challenging than others. So some of this was working with observation. I don't know that there is true consensus because there are some astrologies that are just delivering and discovering old texts and resurrecting ancient material that we can now translate, where before they were lost to civilization. There's new influences like astrology, as I mentioned, and there's also a sense of things like channeled information. A lot of the stuff that came out of the Theosophical Society really gave us an understanding of vibrational frequencies and what planets were working at what vibration. Now, because it was channeled information, there's a lot of it that's respected and embraced, and there are other people who perhaps still question some of that information. But bit by bit, this has been absorbed into, I guess it's a legacy of astrology, so that we not only see that certain planets mean certain things or occupy certain frequencies, but we can see how that may evolve over time, as our understanding of astrology also evolves over time.
What were some of the ancient civilizations that utilised astrology?
It's almost all civilizations have their sky stories and their narratives. Some actually encompass, it's part of their origin story, that they believed that life came from outer space and actually interacted with us and helped develop life as we know it in some way. For others, it was very, very different, but there was a notion of utilising the stars and the nightscape as a way of understanding our place in the universe and our place in life. So, people used it from all sorts of things, from religious ritual and worship to, the eclipses were always a big deal in ancient cultures because the ancients believed that it foretold the death of the king. Yeah. So a lot of that was about, they would look to the heavens to actually understand even if it was an elected leader, that you would imagine that there was some leader that there would be a fall from grace that would result in the end of their life. And so some of these things actually become a signal, if you like, or a sign of some of the political nuances that people or civilizations were dealing with. Some civilizations, particularly the seafaring cultures, would navigate by the stars. So it actually gave them a fixed position in which they could actually move and, assess where they were in relation to those fixed points in the sky. So there's been many traditions that have embraced the stars, and the Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Sumerians, and each of them had their own way of working with the stars. So we often see that they had slightly differing techniques, all relevant. Yeah, interesting.
Really interesting.
So one of the interesting stories that I heard when I was studying astrology was the Mayans not only believed in astrology and looked to the stars to govern their cycles, and they created the calendar around the cyclic nature of the stars, particularly the moon. The Mayan calendar is a lunar calendar rather than the solar calendar that we use. And so in many ways was more in touch with those more natural cycles, being a 28-day moon cycle. But what's interesting is in Mayan astrology, they foresaw the demise of their own culture and the decimation of their own culture. So when the Spanish invaded, they actually put up no resistance. They believed it was their fate. And we won't know how that played out, but over many years, that's actually what it's why that civilization has died out. They did not put up any fight. So between the introduced diseases that were brought in and their own belief system, we only have the information that's been salvaged and still exists today. People still use their calendar, their astrology, their understanding of life and spirituality through those things that have been left behind.
Wow, how interesting.
Yeah, very interesting, isn't it?
And with the different planets, of course, they were gradually discovered, right? So as they're discovered, this adds another layer of understanding to cultures, but also to what astrology means for people. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes. I think initially astrology was really understood only by a select few. It may have been your local holy person, or it may have been healers and healing women predominantly who were necessarily healers and helping their communities. There was a bit of a disparity between perhaps the understanding of the masses and those who worked with it in a more skilled or knowledgeable way. And even today we may find that that's still the same, that the understanding of astrology for the masses may be more of a curiosity rather than a real understanding of how they can work with it in their lives. But humanity is becoming more conscious of the consciousness of all living things, including the planet that we live on. And our earth is evolving just as we are. Okay, just as our understanding, our awareness is evolving, the earth is also evolving. And we are part of a solar system that is also evolving. So I feel that as we keep moving forward, there will be more about the planets that are revealed to us that we can then work with in some way, some more than others. But there really is a sense of life is not static. Life is constantly in movement. And I think our understanding of the planets and what they bring will shift as our consciousness shifts. As we evolve to a higher vibration, I think the planets are too. And we're going to see different expressions of that, which I look forward to.
Yeah, so do I. And different ways of relating to modalities like astrology. You know, I know some people are very fatalistic about it and others see it more as a springboard of growth and pointing to certain dynamics and maybe highlighting shadows or strengths. If people were to start looking at things like their natal chart, what would be some things that they could start considering? I know there's a lot.
Well, it's interesting because part of learning about astrology is actually reflecting on your own natal chart, because you know yourself and you know how things have played out in your life. So it's an easy way to actually look and assess and see what your personal experiences have been, not just reading the chart in a way that is cookbook, you know, this in this sign means this. I think there's so many free resources out there nowadays that are really great. And there's also a lot of rubbish out there on the internet, as you would know. But I still think a great way to start learning is just looking even at having an understanding of your sun and your moon sign. So your sun is more about your purpose and who you are in the world. What is it that you're evolving into? It really is a planet of being in some way. So it's the energy that you resonate to, where the moon represents your emotional nature and perhaps your default setting, that when you don't necessarily have the influences of society to consider, when you're in the privacy of your own home, or when trouble hits and you naturally default to a more natural expression, it will be your moon sign that actually reveals what that is. So even starting with the basics, and we all begin with those kinds of basics, can give you a little bit of an understanding about the different aspects of yourself, because there are different aspects of ourselves that come out at different times or with different people. And even just a really simple understanding of those things can really be a great place to start playing with astrology and what the planets mean for you in your chart.
Great. People may have heard as well, like inner planets and outer planets. Can you demystify that and what that means?
The inner planets actually are more personal, so they really reveal a particular part of our personality, or what we recognise as our personality. And each planet holds a different function. So Mercury is about our communication styles and about the way we think. And so it often reveals our learning style, how we communicate with people. If we're looking at a couple or mother and child or siblings, charts of siblings, the Mercury of each person actually reveals a lot about what they need to understand your communication. So it's interesting. And even to understand our own learning styles and what we need can be really helpful. So, you know, we've all heard that Venus is the planet of love. We've heard men are from Mars, women are from Venus. So some of this, you know, has permeated pop culture, even though we don't fully understand what the planets mean. But again, it represents a different part of your nature. So Venus, it will, you know, inform you about how you do love, what you need to feel loved. Moon is about connection. It's about our many things, relationship with our mother, for example. And Mars is about action. How do we take action in the world? So you can see all of it has a place in the overall personality, or describing how you would function in the world, what you need from the world, and what you're here to contribute. The outer planets, they call them more the transcendental planets. So that is that when we're ready to transcend our ego, or what we know as our personality, these planets and the transits of these planets often provide insight as to what area of your life you're working with and what it is that you're meant to transform in some way. So again, each of the planets have particular meanings. Pluto is about transformation. Neptune is about connecting to our spirituality. Okay, so it's a very, when we have a Neptune transit, we won't feel very connected to real life. There's a sense of actually wanting to escape and experience something beyond the concrete world that we know. But it is interesting because the outer planets move far more slowly than the cycles of the inner planets. We all know the sun takes a year to move around the zodiac, you know, and Mars approximately 2 years. So each planet has its cycle. Because the outer planets are much slower in their passage through each zodiac sign, we really get a whole generation that will be born under a particular planet. And it's like they're ushering in a new aspect of this, or a new way of understanding that particular planet. So we may find, let's take Pluto for an example. Those of us who were born under, who have Pluto in Virgo, we were born under the influence of Pluto in Virgo. We're really here to transform the nature of work, in a nutshell. So in that generation, we saw supposedly equal pay for men and women. I know we can still debate that one. But we also saw many transitions to work. You know, that whole notion of education being more available to people. People actually aspiring to different kinds of work. We're now about to see the transition with AI and how that will affect people's notion of work. But all of this is asking us to see beyond work as our identity, that it's not who we are. It may be what we do, it may be how we earn a living, but it is not who we are. And that's what that generation is here to transform. The following generation was born under the influence of Pluto being in Libra. And during that time, in the 70s, when this came in, we actually saw the notion of a fault-free divorce, and divorce being much easier. We saw family law coming to the forefront, and legislation being passed that allowed a different expression of the Marriage Act and divorce particularly. So where you were tied to someone for life, unless there were really specific grounds and you actually had to name who was at fault. So where previously marriage was tied to very specific, it was a very specific contract, and divorce was only allowed in very specific cases. You really had to prove someone was at fault, someone was an adulterer, or there were only very narrow grounds for divorce. And there was such shame, social shame and stigma around divorce. But those children who were born under Pisces being in Libra have actually grown up with a very different concept of relationship. We now see most couples living together before they marry. Well, that was never ever possible before Pluto being in Libra. We see more equality in the way that people negotiate their relationships. They aren't tied to particular gender roles. And this again is that notion of equality that Libra brings. So you see Pluto in Libra functions very differently. And this is the generation that really will teach us that love isn't prescribed. Love actually is love, regardless of what labels or limits you want to put around it. And we're seeing all of that, you know, in that passage. Although this didn't happen in Libra, Pluto in Libra generation, we are seeing that as those children are coming of age, they're the people that are voting for same-sex marriage, and they're the ones who have ushered in some of those new definitions of relationship that we currently accept and live with. Yeah, interesting. So the outer planets are really interesting. They bring in more social themes. They bring in more of a collective consciousness, and what we as individuals are being asked to embrace, participating in life during those times.
And I've heard that when these outer planets transit or go over your inner planets, that can be some interesting things to look at in a natal chart or in any chart.
Absolutely. And they usually usher in big changes, what I would call soul changes. So it's not just surface stuff, should I change jobs? They usually bring in some level of personal crisis, or what I would call the healing crisis, where we're really being asked to question the life that we've built in some way and our stock standard way of operating in the world. It doesn't mean that the life that you've created is wrong or bad. It's just that notion of evolution, that something different is being called forth at this point in your life. Pardon me. And the outer planets often give huge clues as to what that is for you personally. And that also is dependent on what houses the planets are occupying and working with at the time. So for those of you who don't know, in astrology we work with a 12-house system, and we dissect the chart into 12 separate houses that represent 12 separate areas of life. Now, it's a huge debate as to which house system you should use. So most people actually find a house system that works for them or that worked for their teacher, and you operate within the model that you were taught. But even among astrologers today, there's still great debate over which is more useful, which is more accurate.
Why?
I think it's derived from a good place. People actually want to feel that we're offering best practice.
Sure.
But as you would know, there are many facets of the truth, okay? So a way of dividing up the sky and the zodiac could still work, even though it may be different from what I use or from you know, what different people use. What's interesting and what I love is that there's still debate about our practice that has us reflecting on well, what is useful and what is handy, and why do people think that that's a better way of doing things? And I think that that's necessary no matter what discipline you operate in, whether that was medicine or engineering. Not that I'm saying we're the equivalent of medicine, but there is a sense of there's an importance in reflective practice and rigour and questioning. And so I welcome that debate, even though some people don't like it.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. But just to finish that notion, so the houses that represent a different area of your life.
Okay.
And that gives us huge clues as astrologers when we're looking at the transits to your chart to actually say, you know, this is going to bring up career issues, or maybe it's going to bring up questions in your marriage, or maybe this is going to play out with your children. So it gives important clues about how you may work with this energy.
So can you talk us through those 12 houses?
Sure. So the first house is really about our physicality, who we are in the world. Some people call it the house of well-being. That is, it's when you have vitality and good health. It's what life looks like for you. But it means many things. It's how you show up in the world. It's the first thing that people may see about you, is the sign on the ascendant, which many of you will have heard as the rising sign. And that was the sign that was rising in the east as the sun came up at dawn at the time that you were born. So the second house is about money, essentially. And because astrology has been psychologized, it's also what we would label as the house of self-esteem or self-worth. And that's been derived because the way we do money is often a reflection of our own self-esteem and how we value ourselves, or not, as the case may be. So the third house is, a modern astrology says it's a house of communication, but it holds that whole notion of your earliest relationships, which is siblings, some of your earliest relationships. So it's the house of siblings, it's the house of our early school experiences. So it's early learning, but within that structured environment of school. And so often when people have challenges or difficulties in integrating into the school system, often that shows up in the third house. Yeah. So the fourth house is very much about family. Okay, and it's said that it's one of the parental houses, so it reflects traditionally it used to be the mother. Nowadays we actually say it's the parental influence that nurtured or looked after you at home or gave you a sense of home and belonging. And that may not necessarily be the mother in today's day and age. But again, both interpretations work. They tell a particular story about your relationship to that parent and what you've learnt from them. So, but it is one of the parental houses. The fifth house, it represents children, but it's also about creativity. The modern take on it is it's about your creative expression. So creativity, looking at procreation. You know, it's the things or the forms that spring forth from you. It's also become the house of romantic love, you know, romance, flings, short-term, romantic energy. So it has a number of different influence there, but all again seem to seem to evolve from that creative impulse. So the sixth house, again, is one of those houses that mean many things, but it is actually, the ancients called it the house of ill health. It's where health issues show up and will indicate what kind of health issues will show up, okay? Our modern take is a little more positive. It describes the house of our daily routines, the day-to-day things that either nourish us or deplete us. are found here. It's also, being a Virgo kind of house, it describes our day-to-day work. So not so much career as in the long-term progression of our skill set, but the immediate work environment and again what we bring to that work environment. So the 7th house is about partnerships and marriage. Traditionally it was always the marriage house, and the ancients also said that it revealed who your open enemies were, those that you faced directly, that were in opposition to you or opposed you in some way. The 8th house is another one of those catch-all things that has evolved somewhat. Traditionally, it was always the house of anything that was taboo or occult, anything that remained hidden. So that was people's sexuality. It was around finances, particularly finances of the husband, it would have been back in that day. So your partner's finances. But it's still today the house of intimacy. And there's now a psychological take on that as well, that it may not just be about sexuality, that it may be about intimacy in general. But it caught all things like death. You know, it was one of the Scorpio houses. So death, taxes, all that deeply complex stuff of life, and gave a lot of clues about how we may work with that. Yeah, for sure. The 9th house, technically speaking, is probably about our belief systems and our faith. It is about religion, traditionally. But the ancients also saw it as anything that would open the mind. So it was about higher learning. It was also about travel. You know, that old adage that travel opens the mind. So people who had an affinity with different cultures, or perhaps would emigrate and end up living in a very different culture to the one that they grew up with, may find that they've got a busy 9th house. So the 10th house is about career and career aspirations, and more importantly, vocation. So it may reflect what your calling is or what your purpose is in terms of taking it out into the world in a social role, indicating what your social role may be. And that, yeah, that's all. It still remains very much the same interpretation. It is one of the parental houses. So traditionally it was the house of the father, because you took his name out into the world. You took his influence. The father's influence is to help you leave the nest. The mother's is to hold and nurture. So traditionally it was the house of the father, but it may be that you were raised by a single mother, and that's actually your shaping influence. And so you would read that with the symbolism of the 10th house. The 11th house is mainly about our relationships to groups and to friends. Okay, so it talks about social dynamics, how we are in organisations. Okay, and it reflects a lot about the way that we work with people when there's more of one of us in the room. And then finally, the 12th house I like to think of as a house of retreat. It's one of spirituality, and certainly the ancients called it the house of self-undoing, because it's all those hidden parts of our personality where we keep hidden. Psychologically, we keep them hidden in the 12th house. So it's a house of great healing if you can actually look at those aspects of yourself, your life. But when transits bring in the 12th house, you can often be looking at incomplete stuff, either this lifetime, psychologically incomplete stuff this lifetime, or previous lifetimes, if you believe in the notion of previous lifetimes. So these houses really help inform the way that you would work with these planetary energies.
That's so great. Thank you so much for outlining that, because I know particularly if people aren't familiar with astrology, they might hear those words flown around. And so to really outline systematically what they are and to see, okay, if I've got a lot of planets in a particular house, there's probably a theme that I'm working with here.
Absolutely. And not all houses will have planets in them. So a lot of people get really stressed about this. What does it mean? Does it mean that area of my life's not going to work? No, it just means it's not a big focus for you this lifetime. And you'll actually find that there's quite a lot of juice in the houses that do have planets in them. And you'll find that you'll cycle through those, you know, it's a journey where you do cycle through the same questions or similar circumstances may evolve in some way, that you're learning those lessons, but each time on a deeper and deeper level.
That's fascinating.
Mm.
And when it comes to, obviously you mentioned with there being different structures of the houses, there's also different disciplines of astrology.
Mm-hmm.
Can you share what some of those are, and maybe some that you find really fascinating and interesting?
Look, there are so many. I'm probably not going to do this justice, but there's a big swell of traditional astrologers that actually really resonate with some of the ancient texts and the ancient meanings. And astrology back then was very mathematical. So it's great for people who love protocols and systems. There's a particular way of working with this that isn't subject as much to personal interpretation. There's still some level of that. But there are some great tools that actually show someone how to work with a planetary influence across their lifetime. That you may find that, you know, ages 20 to 27 are times that you're working with Venus. And then you may find through using some of these techniques that you may go on to then work with another planet. And this really shows, this technique is often nicknamed the ages of man. It really does give you this notion that at different times in your life, you're working with different things. And certainly that notion that, Venus, it might be appropriate at that time to be working with Venus because that's the time of discovering what love means and falling in love and meeting your marriage partner. Certain ages lend themselves to the lessons of certain planets. And within astrology generally, there are so many different pathways. You have financial astrology, you have looking at synastry, which is looking at relationships and how two charts play out against each other, and can give huge clues not only to people in a relationship, but how you might work with the energy of your child's chart, and what things might evolve between siblings, that the chart may reflect that for you. So there are many, many focuses. Health is another one that it really is incredibly interesting domain. And looking at your chart to actually see where are the weaknesses in your body and how you can work with those to strengthen them. This isn't my discipline, but I'm fascinated. And also looking at where the strengths are in your body and how that will play out physically for you. People who use astrology to look at health often use the chart as a timing technique for when are those health crises likely to hit, and what is it that what is the remedy is also within the chart. So very, very interesting, great discipline. One of the things I'm drawn to at the moment is financial astrology. Not just, I know everyone wants to make money. It's not even around the money aspect for me, but it's that notion of that everything, including the money markets, including real estate cycles, we know that they have their own cycle, but it's interesting to actually see that they can be paired with astrology cycles, and that this actually reveals an innate timing to certain cycles where downturns are going to begin, where upturns are going to begin. And not just for individuals or not just for particular shares of a particular company, but like you said, particular countries. We can see this play out in different countries' birth charts. So I find this incredibly interesting. And there's some really great astrologers who specialise in this. And if you are wanting to work with astrology in any of these ways, you will actually find there are certain people who are renowned for this particular discipline or working with astrology in this way. There's a lot of good stuff out there.
Fascinating. And of course, as we've spoken previously, there are these astrologers who give counsel to political leaders and people in court and all those sorts of things. And of course, we know there's stock market trading, astrology classes and all kinds of things. So there are lots of ways where people have anchored astrological wisdom into this real world, and people who wouldn't have otherwise maybe been attracted to it, who are paying a lot of money to gain that knowledge. So there's obviously something in it if they're following it.
Absolutely. It's now very famous that Ronald Reagan, who was President of the United States at one point, both Nancy Reagan consulted an astrologer, and they were both advised for what would be the key times for him to either be sworn in or to deliver particular legislation that needed to be passed at a particular time. And their astrologer, she never ever revealed that she worked with the Reagans, but it came to light after her death. But so much so that, and I can't remember, I think it was when Ronald Reagan was sworn in as governor of California. He was sworn in at so many minutes past midnight or so many minutes to midnight. And it was just a very private ceremony that swore him in, because that was the most auspicious time for him to assume the responsibilities of governor. And you can really see that that they used the timing techniques that astrology brought with it so that they could operate in a more favourable way. But apparently their astrologer even foresaw or was able to indicate his assassination attempt. Another example of that, and the way that astrology has evolved, is the technique of cosmobiology that came out of Germany in the 1930s, or was developed in Germany in the 1930s, and came out to the West in a much bigger way after the Second World War. And apparently this was a technique using midpoints that was developed. Hitler was actually very into the esoteric, and was looking for ways that would give him and Germany an edge in the war. And so with this midpoint technique was developed to try to pinpoint the exact moments of bombings and what cities would be vulnerable or next on the Allies' hit list. And so this was something that was developed in secret, or it was not readily known at the time. And story has it that when it was unsuccessful, Hitler actually ordered the death of a lot of astrologers at that time. So it was another reason that this technique went underground in Germany at that time. And it was only after the Second World War when this could safely be brought forward and examined as a technique and taught as a technique that people have found all sorts of uses for it. It's incredibly powerful. That notion that in your chart there are many midpoints, that is, the midpoint between two planets, and when it is hit by transit, that is by conjunction, opposition or square, that fated things may happen in your chart. So there are many astrologers that have been looking at the chart of Charlie Kirk, given the recent assassination and what that's meant for the world. And the whole world is actually watching this and trying to attribute meaning to this and why it's come to this. And there's actually no transits in his chart that would actually signal an assassination or some sort of death at this time. But apparently there are huge transits to midpoints that actually show this to be an incredibly trying time. So the midpoints often reveal things that we never ever would have seen in a chart looking at the chart at surface value. It's actually brilliant for timing, which is actually why it was developed during the war, that whole notion. But we talked about leaders who have actually not just followed astrology, but tried to utilise it for a greater purpose. And Hitler was certainly one of them.
Interesting.
It's interesting because when people in high places or high status individuals or high worth individuals are using astrology, I know a lot of the masses actually look at that in quite a sensational way, like it's too alternative for people to contemplate. But if people understood the true potential of astrology and actually seeing that it's like watching the hands of a clock or time unfolding and moving forward across your lifetime or a company's lifetime, it wouldn't hold this mystical, magical place in people's minds that it's something that's hard to fathom or understand, and that there is quite a practical piece to using astrology that actually does see you syncing with the cycles of your life, aligning with your true potentials. And that is really the true gift of astrology.
Please tune in to part 2 of our conversation as we continue this exploration of all things astrology.